Welcome to Just Talking About Jesus. I'm Jan Johnson, a seasoned believer who loves relationships and, just talking about Jesus.
I went into the Marine recruiter's office and I said, "How fast can you get me out of here?" He said, "Have you committed a crime?" And I said, "Yeah, but I've never been caught." So we sat and talked. And 2 months later, I was in San Diego in boot camp. And, looking back on that, that was God involved in my life before I even knew who God was, because he knew that I couldn't stay where I was, because if I would have stayed, I'd have been dead or in jail.
Few people have a memory block of their entire childhood. Most of us have bits and pieces pop up, like a birthday or walking home from school with a friend or a conversation with a family member. Not so with today's guest. With no memory of his childhood till the age of 12, John Jarman had no conscious way to overcome the unknown pain in his past. When his adult life crumbled around him, he finally reached out for professional help, both emotionally and spiritually. Over the next 10 years, this inner work led John to places he and his counselor would never have expected. As John moved closer to God in the process, the storm hit harder than ever, taking him to his knees. Discover how John got up and, by the grace of God, walked through the storm of his life and strengthened his faith through completely surrendering to his Heavenly Father. As John learned and shares in his book, trusting God and becoming vulnerable are the only way to true freedom. In Broken and Redeemed, John Jarman shares a story of beautiful, authentic brokenness that rests in the redemption only found in God. Welcome, friends, to episode 28. My guest today is John Jarman. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. I was looking forward to this. So,
yeah, tell me a little bit about your testimony.
Well, it's a kind of a weird journey, because I didn't really realize that, I was a victim of childhood trauma until I was in my late 40s, early 50s, when I moved back to the Pacific Northwest, and I started to explore my past, and I kind of uncovered that. And then I really didn't grow up in the church, so I didn't know a lot about Christ, other than when I would visit my grandmother, who's from Arkansas, and she would always tell me, John, she'd say, "Johnny, God's got something special planned for you." And
Nice.
so, when the book came out, I knew she was smiling down from heaven, because she knew something like this was going to happen. But as I got older and I went into the Marine Corps, I started getting exposure to church. I started my football coaching career, and I was down in the South. And so I don't know if you're familiar with Fellowship of Christian Athletes, huge organization. So I started attending our school's huddles and that type of stuff. So my faith was growing, but I wasn't walking. And there's a difference between giving your life and then actually walking and understanding what faith really is. It wasn't until I came back up here and I started working with my counselor and I found a spiritual mentor about 5 years into working with Christina. And that's when everything really changed. And I started working on just, prayer plans, reading, that type of stuff, trying to understand the Bible more. But even working with Scotty, it wasn't until 2016 to when I truly gave up control and said, "Look, God, it's all in your hands. It's your timing." Because even as I walked, I still wanted to do things that I wanted to do. I wanted to do it in my timing. And I think that's all new Christians, because they're not sure, especially if you don't have a mentor. I mean, that's what I said. As soon as I found Scotty, that's when everything started to change, because it was more of a disciplined regiment, of daily reading, daily prayer. And that's what you have to grow your relationship. And, I tell people all the time, it's not a religion, it's a relationship. And, it's a one-on-one relationship. A.W. Tozer, I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he says that when you meet Christ, you're going to be alone. And I was, because it was 3:30 in the morning. I was on my living room floor in my prayer plan, and tears were pouring out of my eyes. And I was just like, I'm done. I can't do it alone. It's all yours. Here you go. And that's really when my vision and the Bible changed, because the Bible would, I read the Bible and I understood things differently. I started to see the world differently. I started to see myself differently. And I call it, in my book, I call it the self-examination. And it causes, that aspect of it causes you to start looking at yourself, because, you have to renew your heart and your mind, and you have to see what's not of Christ. And that's the tough part, it's a bed of roses, but we get the thorns when we're doing that because it's a little bit tough.
Isn't that truth? Yeah.
So that's kind of how I came to Christ. There's a lot of stuff in between, that, and we can get into that. I'll let you ask questions and we can go from there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think that it is to begin with, it's just a head knowledge, except in the Lord, but it's when it gets down into this
Oh
part,
yeah.
you
Yeah.
got to move down to where the Holy
Yeah.
Spirit can move you. And when
Well,
you,
and I think too, that's where the church, and when I say the church, I speak of the body of Christ, not the buildings we go to on Sunday. I think that's where we kind of let down new Christians because, they accept Christ and we don't say, hey, let me show you what you got to do now. They just, because when I accepted Christ, I was like, okay, what do I do? I don't know what to do. I started reading the Bible. The Bible was super complex to me at the time. And I didn't know how to pray and all that stuff. And so, we have to have that mentorship and that discipleship. So,
absolutely, you got to get plugged in right away. And
mhm.
somebody needs to invite you, put their arm around you, say, come on, buddy, let's walk this
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're a new Christian, you start the Bible in Genesis and you start reading the Old Testament, you're going to get scared.
Exactly. What
you
is
know, I
this
used to call,
about?
so Jan, I used to call the Old Testament the dark side of the Bible. And so when I started working with Scotty, I started really kind of understanding what he was teaching and everything. And so I was like, I want to know more about them. I want to get kind of behind the word. So I enrolled in seminary school and I'm 8 hours shy of a master's of theology. And my very first class was Old Testament review. And I just went, oh, you got jokes, you know? And so, it's just, that's the way things happen, then after that class, I started seeing a correlation between the Old Testament, the New Testament, all of that. And, it just made more sense. And that's the thing where I think discipleship and finding that person that's farther along on a walk than you are that can help answer questions. I still read the Bible and I call Scotty and I'm like, hey, what are they talking about here? you
Exactly.
know? So
Well, and yeah, when you really realize that the Old Testament is all about the New Testament,
yes,
you know,
yes,
when
yeah.
you understand the Old Testament, then you go, oh, I see
Mm-hmm.
why we need sacrifice.
Yep.
I see why it's the blood of the lamb. I see
Yep.
why, all the sins that weren't there. And
Mm-hmm.
you also see how much God really loves you.
Well, and you also see the fact that he's going to use the least worthy people. Because I mean, you look at the people he used, and Moses was a murderer, David was an adulterer. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And so, he's trying, I think, to show us that it doesn't matter what you've done in your past. I have a purpose for you. If you just let me in and let me get into your heart, I'll show you the purpose. And so that's the beauty, I think, of the Old Testament. So
Well, let's talk about your book a little bit.
yeah.
Title and why'd you write it? How'd that come?
Well, my counselor told me in 2014 that I should write a book. My story's not too unique, but it is my story. And so I shared that with a couple friends that she told me to write a book. And then I told them a little of the story and they're like, yeah, John, you need to write a book. And I'm going, okay, I'm a PE teacher, a football coach, a former Marine, and I have dyslexia. How am I going to write a book? And so I found a young lady at the church I was going to. She did all the media for the church. And so she helped me kind of outline the book as far as the chapters and stuff. And so I started writing. And about the fifth chapter, I was like, where do I go? I don't know what to do. And so I put the book on the shelf in 2014. And it wasn't until, let's see, today it'll be 3 years. So it was 2020. One Friday morning, I was reading in the Bible and Hebrews 10:36 talks about the will of God. And it says, when you're doing the will of God, you must persevere to get what he promised. And then an hour later, I read a lot when I do cardio and I listen to worship music. And I was reading AJ Swoboda's very first book entitled Messy. He was talking about the will of God. And in his book, he said nobody told him if anybody would read his book or buy it, he just had to write it. And I went, okay, I got to finish my book. 6 years had passed. So my faith is totally different.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay. So I was getting ready to go on a trip to the Gulf of Mexico. And I said, I'm going to write for 2 hours every morning. Figured we're out, pretty inspiring sunrise at the Gulf of Mexico. I'll get up 2 hours, write, and then go, have my vacation. So then I continued that when I returned after a week, and the book was done in 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So it was just a spiritual dump. I use a lot of Bible verses and quotes in the book and in the text of the chapters. And people ask me all the time, how did you know where to put that? And I'm like, it just came to me. I was writing and I'd be, oh, this is perfect. And I'd throw it in there. So, it was truly God's hand in all the writing. The title came just because the original title was God is waiting for you, because that's how what I felt is he's standing there waiting for me. Okay. He's knocking all the time, but I'm not listening.
Yeah.
And then after I got into the book, I was like, well, broken and redeemed is better because Titus 3-7 is the broken and redeemed Bible verse. And I don't have it committed to memory, so I can't recite it right now, but it's the broken and redeemed Bible verse because we're all broken. And then we all have to have that redemption. And then as I was working with my publisher, the subtitle originally was, it was broken and redeemed. God is waiting for you. So the subtitle is actually supposed to speak more to what the story's about. So they actually changed it to finding freedom through complete. It wasn't surrender. They used a different word and I can never remember it, but I didn't really like the word. And so I kept, as we finished the meeting, I was like, God, give me another word, give me another word. And then the next day, surrender came up. And so I sent an email to the publishing company and I said, hey, what do you think about this? I can do either. I'm okay with either one, but I think this sounds better. And in less than an hour, they emailed me back. They said, John, this is awesome. It's perfect. So that's where the title came from, Finding Freedom Through Complete Surrender. And if you flip the book over, it says God is waiting for you. You just need to surrender. And then it goes into the synopsis of the book. So they kept the original subtitle in there, which I thought was pretty cool of them. And that's how the title came about. And, the manuscript is that I submitted to my editor is everything but the 14th chapter. We added the 14th chapter during the editing process because my editor she felt there needed to be something between what's chapter 13 and then what was chapter 14, which is now 15. And so she did an interview with me about how I surrendered, what work I did with Scotty. And so that became chapter 14. So that's how the book came about. I also have discussion questions at the end of every chapter. And I tell people, you don't have to do them as you read it. You can come back, but the questions are designed. The way I put the questions in, I hope are designed to help somebody who's brand new to Christ know how to kind of grow. And then somebody that's extremely faithful, that makes them kind of see where they test their faith and do that self-examination. And so hopefully it deepens their faith. And that's the design of the questions. But I would encourage anybody that reads the book to do the questions because I think it's a great self-reflection. So
Yeah. Well,
it's the teacher in me.
and I would guess that probably I wrote my first book was a memoir, and
Mm-hmm.
my first husband had a brain tumor and ended up paralyzed after the surgery.
Oh, wow.
He died when he was 38, but he kept this journal of his walk through it and stuff that was so rich. It's like, oh my gosh. And I felt like God wanted me to write that, but that was like, it took me almost 30 years to write it because I didn't know what I was doing, and how to put it together and all of that aspect of it. But it's really turned out to be a real blessing. But
that's awesome.
It's hard to write.
Yeah, it is. It is. And it's just, I had to have, yes. And I had to have an editor because of my dyslexia, so there was no way.
Editor.
Yeah.
Yeah. But just even because you're vulnerable.
Yeah. And here's the funny thing. So my counselor for 8 years of counseling was trying to get me to become vulnerable because as men, and I say this on a lot of podcasts, and if there's men listening to the show today, I want you to know, let down your pride, let down your ego, open your heart to God, and then your life gets so much easier because the veil gets removed, and then you can be true to yourself and true to the people that you love. Because without that, I think you hide part of yourself from people because you don't want to ask for help and you don't want to be vulnerable. And I think it's tougher for men than it is for women. And so my counselor was trying to get me to become vulnerable. And so the review of one of the people I submitted the manuscript to, she wrote back and she said, it's such a pleasure to see the vulnerability from a male author. So I sent that to my counselor and I said, all right, you got your wish.
Nailed it.
After 10 years, it took that long.
What was the hardest part to write?
I think it was about some of the trials and some of the things I've been through because I didn't want to hurt people. I didn't want to reopen wounds because, I made some bad decisions. I'm not going to sit here and say that I was not perfect. And so I made bad decisions. Well, no, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not perfect either. But, it's because of those decisions, you've affected other people's lives. And so I didn't want to open those wounds again, but I wanted to share enough of the story so people could see where I was and where I've come to, and what God's done in my life, because and that's important. That was important to me. And that was the toughest part of the book to write, is to speak of those and try not to open up anybody who read the book. So
Right, right. So what were some of the things God actually did with you?
since the book,
Yeah, that or in the book too. Yeah.
well, I mean, the thing is looking back on my life and knowing where God was in my life, even though I didn't want him. And I'll give you an example. So when I grew up, my dad left when I was 12. I got involved in drugs and alcohol, and I was in the party scene selling drugs till I was 23 years old. And I was in a party and I was like, there's got to be something more to life to this. And I got up and I walked out. 2 days later, I went into the Marine recruiter's office and I said, how fast can you get me out of here? He said, have you committed a crime? And I said, yeah, but I've never been caught. So we sat and talked. And 2 months later, I was in San Diego in boot camp. And, looking back on that, that was God involved in my life before I even knew who God was, because he knew that I couldn't stay where I was, because if I would have stayed, I'd have been dead or in jail. And so that's the beauty of looking back on things like that. And then since if you'd have told me 4 years ago that I'd be on 100 some podcasts and radio shows talking about my testimony and preaching the gospel and sharing the gospel, I would have laughed at you even then 4 years ago. And, my faith was growing, was in a place where, the book was almost ready to start. And so, but you don't know, and it wasn't until I hit that I knew this was my calling. And so this is what I do now. I try to share it as much as I can. I go back to that Old Testament. I have a tattoo. You can barely see it on my forearm here. It's Exodus 20:20. And it says, do not be afraid. God has come to test you so that the fear of God will be in you to keep you from sinning. But the address is what caught my eye when I read it, because it's 2020. What's
Uh-huh.
clear vision? 2020. So to me, that's the clear vision of God. And there's 17 other verses in the Bible with that address. So 10 of them have instructions on how we're to behave and act as Christian. The others are just parts of stories. And so, that spoke to me so much. And I was a Marine for 4.5 years, never got a tattoo. And that was my first tattoo. And I put it there to remind me, but what it does is now is when I meet people and I shake hands, they see it and they're like, what is that? And so now it's opened the door for a gospel presentation. And I don't press it. If they want to know, then I talk to them, because, I don't like to push it, but if somebody has questions, then I'm going to sit there and talk to them. So
Invite him in. Yeah.
yep,
Invite
yep,
him to what you found. Yeah.
yep,
The
yep.
joy of his salvation. So you said you were abused when you were small. How did your view of God, how did you get to a point where you could call him daddy?
Well, that was the weird part, because growing up, it's hard to say this, but I didn't see evidence of love in my childhood. It was violence. And so it took me a long time to understand God's true love. And again, it probably wasn't until I started working with Scotty, in the past, from 2015 till, the current time. And so it took me a long time and to realize that I did have him. But I also made amends with my dad before that. And we had a heart-to-heart talk. And, I hadn't met Scotty yet. I was in the military still. It was probably 1988. It's when I went to my dad's house. And how I started the amends is I punched him in the mouth and then we went and talked. So I don't recommend that to anybody, but that's all I knew at the time. And we talked about the past. We talked about everything. He showed me things that were, that weren't that I was told were not the truth. And then I flew back to Seattle and I confronted my mom. And so we had the heart to heart. And so that made it easier a little bit. And my dad, changed his ways. He was married again to my stepmom. He was married to her longer than my mom. They raised one of her grandkids because her daughter died on an operating table because she was a heroin addict. And my dad and Millie took Josh in and raised him until he was in high school. And when my dad passed away, and it's just to watch him make amends with Josh. I could have been jealous of that, because the way he treated Josh. But what I saw it is my dad's trying to make amends. That's the way I looked at it. He's trying to say he made a mistake and he's not going to do it again. And that's the way I looked at that. situation. And, it was truly awesome to see. So,
That transformation. Yeah.
mhm.
Did you feel like your dad had accepted the Lord or?
I truly don't know if I mean, he knew who God was because my grandmother in Arkansas was his father, or was his mother. And so, he knew who God was, but truly accepted. We never really talked about it because I wasn't in my faith place enough to know. I hope so. That's all I can say. And, but by his actions with Josh, I think if he had accepted Christ, he's in heaven because of what he did with Josh. So,
Yeah.
so
Uh, Isn't it isn't it neat though to know that your grandma had been praying for you forever?
oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I tell people that if you got to have somebody that's praying for you because that shield of protection, and
The real
it
deal.
was just, yeah, yeah, it is looking back on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it was my
yeah.
grandma that was praying for me and I know that,
Yep.
I mean all of us have gone astray.
Yeah.
Gone
Well,
each
and,
our own way.
it could have happened to I have three brothers. Well, I had three brothers. They've all since passed, but the same with them. They could have went down a different road. So,
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So I imagine along the line somewhere you had some forgiveness to do and
oh
recon.
yeah, first of all, I was forgiving me for my actions, and then talking to other people, and then I had to ask for forgiveness too. And when I talk about people will ask me, well, how do you forgive somebody that abused you or hurt you to that extent? And it's not forgiving the act,
Mhm.
it's forgiving the person because we're all susceptible to sin at some level or not. And I think when you forgive the person, then it releases you from the condemnation and the shame and the guilt of the action. And that's the hard part for people to understand, I think. And it takes time and it takes counseling and it takes pastoral counseling to get through that. So,
Mhm. Yeah, it's not an easy thing to do when
no.
there's the horrible things that have happened to you, especially.
Hmm. Well, and for me, I don't remember any of it. So I don't have any memory till I was 12 years old. So I don't. And my counselor's like, John, if we were to recover this memory, you'd probably be in counseling another 15 years. And I'm like, well, I don't want to do it. you know. And if God wants to reveal it, He'll reveal it. But if it's that bad, I don't want to know.
Well, it's hard enough to forgive somebody who slighted you, but when it's
Hmm.
something really bad, it's just you feel like, well, they don't deserve that, and they don't, but we don't either, you
No,
know?
no. And what it says in the Bible, I forgave you, so you must forgive. So I mean, we have to forgive to be forgiven.
Yeah.
And so, and then, when you start to, what for me, when I started to look at the people I really hurt and tried to ask for forgiveness, some people said yes, some people said no. And, that's kind of hurts a little bit, but it's, it's their, they own that. And all I could do is pray that someday they will forgive me. And, that was tough to swallow for a little bit. So,
Yeah, because you kind of hope that things are gonna go okay, but they aren't always. They don't always. Yeah.
and I coached football for a lot of times, and I hate to say it, but I made some bad decisions and it hurt some kids. And they're like, Coach, why weren't you like this back then? And I'm like, I'm a different person. I'm totally different than I was when I was teaching and coaching and, my life. And, I don't regret not having the faith when I coached, but it would be interesting to see with what I have now in my faith and then go back to coaching, but I don't want to coach anymore.
I know. I don't want to go back to teaching anymore either.
Yeah, and it's the schools are a tough place right now, and it's just there's so many distractions, and I was like, I like what I do. I still coach. I'm in the fitness industry. I'm more, I work with more adults than kids, but I do have some kids. But it's a different type of coaching, and so I still coach, and it's a lot different. But some of me goes, oh, what would have been different? And I don't think I don't dwell on it because that time in my life was needed to get me to where I am today. So,
And isn't that the neat thing, the journeys that you're going through, it's
mhm,
know at the time how God
right.
that later on
Yeah.
gonna run into, meet or whatever. the Bible study that I'm just finishing up is called Journeys, and it's walking hand in hand with God. But basically, I've got this format of because this happened, because of this, such and such happened, and resulting in something. And so
Hmm.
you go through and you write out your journey of what happened, and then you compare them to David's life and Joseph's life and Jonah and yeah,
Yeah.
all these characters and what did God teach them along the way? Go back to
Hmm.
you see where he taught in that, but things you wouldn't be where you are. You
Yeah. Well, and I make a joke that I'm the next to Paul, I'm the second biggest sinner. So when Paul was Saul, I'm pretty close there.
you didn't slay anybody, right?
No, I didn't slay anybody, but it felt like it at time. But for me, so the 15th chapter of my book is called Dear Younger Me, and it's after Mercy's Me song. Okay.
Oh,
And so I when that song came out, it really spoke to me. And part of it is because the verse that Bart wrote, and it talks about we weren't meant to carry this beyond the cross. That was a verse that I was just like, oh my gosh, it was like an eye-opening thing. And so I was like, I want to know what made him write the song. So they were coming to town up here in the Northwest, and I was dating a young lady, and it was near her birthday. And I bought two VIP passes that they would sing, not Mercy Me, but the opening act would sing happy birthday to her. And then we got to go backstage. And so I thought, okay, I'm at least going to be in a position where I possibly could meet the guy. So I told the opening act what I was trying to do. And when we got backstage, they brought Mercy Me's road manager over, and I told him what I was trying to do. He goes, well, Bart will be here in 10 minutes. Let me talk to him and see if he has time to talk to you. So he comes over and goes, Bart would love to meet you. And so I went over and we sat for 30 minutes in the backstage and we shared testimony. And if you've seen the movie, I Can Only Imagine, Bart shared all that with me. And this was 2015. I don't think he knew the movie was going to be made yet.
oh,
And, so that when I watched the movie, I was like, wow. And so Bart and I grew up a lot alike. And so his counselor, I said, well, what made you write this song? He said, well, my counselor told me to write this song to my son as if I was writing it to myself. And I said, that's awesome. My counselor told me to write a book and I want to use your song in my book. Can I have your permission? He goes, yes, I just under one condition. He goes, I'd like a copy. And so I've sent him a copy. I haven't heard from him. I don't know what he's even read it, but anyhow, and I took a picture backstage and that's in the book. So people can really see that I was with Bart that day.
I have proof.
And but what I did too is I kind of broke down the song and how it affected me the very first time I heard it. And then I write a letter to my younger self. And I encourage the reader, the very last question is to write a letter to your younger self. Trying to figure out what in your life would you change, what would you wouldn't change, because there's some things that made you who you are. So you don't want to change those things. And then just go through that and look at your past and write a letter to somebody or to yourself. And that was a tough write, but it was one of my favorite parts of the book. And so I closed the book with that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That
Yeah.
is
So,
a neat opportunity you had.
oh, I know. I've tried to, he's been in concert before and I've tried to get backstage, but with COVID and
Yeah.
all this stuff, they won't let anybody backstage, because I wanted to try to see him. I'd love to, hey, Bart, if you're listening, I'd love to, love to know what you think of the book, that type of thing. Cause it'd be interesting to get a little bit of note from him. So,
Yeah. 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 Oh, how special is that?
yeah.
I don't know how you affected him.
No, true. Yeah.
And
And I
I
mean, and,
we look at people
I've,
and we think they're much bigger than who we are. We're just
yep.
people. We all put
Yeah. No, yeah. They're just people.
pants on
I
one
mean,
leg at a time and you're
yep. Yep. And I mean, so last year when I was at the Christian Product Expo, I did a radio interview. And when I got done, the guy says, well, my next interview is Lee Strobel because he was one of the keynote speakers at the event. So I said, really? And so he goes, yeah. And so I wanted to meet Lee, and give him a copy of my book. Cause I mean, get a review from Lee Strobel. Come on. So I'm standing in the hallway and Lee and his wife come walking down the hall and he walks right, Jen, and this is the truth. He walks right up to me and goes, do I know you? And I'm like, no, sir, this is the first time we've met. I said, but I'm happy to meet you. I appreciate, I love your stories, blah, blah, blah. And I said, here's my book and I'd love to have you read it and, tell me what you think of it. And, he went into his interview and I sat outside and talked to his wife the whole time he was doing the interview. So, I've had the opportunity to meet people like that and, to share my testimony with them and to hear it's just been God's opened so many doors, and it's just been amazing. So,
Yeah, that is amazing. What would you like to leave with your listeners?
um, the biggest thing for me is to understand that no matter what you've been through, that you always have redeemed. God's going to redeem you, and He's going to accept you, because it doesn't matter what you've done. And then when you're ready and you've accepted Christ, find that person that can help guide you, because that's the key. And that's what the key was for me. And I wish I would have met Scotty 10 years ago, but I wasn't supposed to. But finding that person that's willing to mentor you and to guide you through how to read the Bible. And Scotty has a 10-step discipleship program that he uses. He calls it the Big 10. He allowed me to put it in the book, and it's a 10-step process of how to teach Bible reading, prayer, Bible memorization, gospel presentation, invitation, memory, all that stuff. And it's a fantastic program, and I've been through it. I've used it with people I disciple, and it's got power to it. And Scotty's probably discipled 1,500 people in his life, because he used to coach college football, and he would do this with all the football players at PLU. And so it's just, I was thrilled when he allowed me to put it in the book. So,
Oh, yeah, that's really great to have.
yep. Yep.
Oh, well, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a pleasure, and I'm anxious to read your book. I will be looking for it. Is there an audio version too?
No, not yet. It's available on Kindle and then anywhere books are sold. But if your listeners want a signed copy, they can go to my website. And if they use the verse Exodus 3:3-7, they get discount, and I'll sign the book and send it off to them. So,
Oh, awesome. That is good. Thank you.
yeah.
Do you know how to follow a show?
I do.
So why would anybody want to follow it instead of just listening to it whenever they found it?
Because it's the right thing to do.
Because if you push that little plus on there or follow, depending on where you're having your podcasts, then you can get notified as soon as a new episode arrives.
Which is brilliant, honestly, because we all live busy lives and I don't want to miss things. And I will.
Especially you don't want to miss just talking about
That's
Jesus.
right. That's right.
I know. All right.
Do you know that you can also text after the podcast?
Isn't that cool?
That is
is
so cool.
a new feature that they have with Buzzsprout. And so it's right at the top of the show notes, and you can just click on it and it'll send me a little text with what your thoughts are about things. Super easy to do. So I would just love to hear from listeners and know what they were thinking, how they affected it or maybe how it touched you and whatever. So yeah, give it a try.
Absolutely. You need to do that. We need to hear from you.
Well, I don't know about you, but my big takeaways from this are that you can have abuse in your background that has formed you, but God can redeem you. You can get to the root of your anger and learn a way of peace and acceptance. Nothing you do can keep you from the love of God, and it's possible to be transformed into God's image. Friend, if you or someone you know has grown up in abuse, seek godly counsel. And if the first one doesn't work, keep seeking. Delve into the Word of God, especially in Psalms, where you can see others who lament and still see God. God knows. God cares. Our God listens. And He answers our prayers. So I would definitely recommend John's book, Broken and Redeemed, Finding Freedom Through Complete Surrender. The link for that will be in the show notes. The recommended podcast this week is The Ed Milet Show. This showcases the greatest peak performers across all industries in one place, sharing their journey, knowledge, and leadership. It includes guests from business, health, collegiate, and professional sports, politics, entrepreneurship, science, and entertainment. You'll find motivation, inspiration, and practical steps to help you become the best version of you. And I have found that it's a really inspiring podcast. So if you want to be motivated, there's a place for you to go. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please feel free to share it with someone you may know, a family member or friend that it may speak to as well. I appreciate you doing that and sharing that, and be blessed this week. My scriptures for today are Romans 8:35. Can anything ever separate us from Christ's love? Does it mean he no longer loves us if we have trouble or calamity, or are persecuted, or hungry, or destitute, or in danger, or threatened with death? Nope. Despite all these things, overwhelming victory is ours through Christ who loves us. And I am convinced that nothing can ever separate us from God's love. Neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither our fears for today nor our worries about tomorrow. Not even the powers of hell can separate us from God's love. No power in the sky above or in the earth below. Indeed, nothing in all creation will ever be able to separate us from the love of God that is revealed in Christ Jesus our Lord. And I look forward to joining you again next time, in your car, walking the dog, wherever you are listening. Blessings, my friend.